Well, welcome all to our webinar today, Finding Your MVP, that's Most Valuable Player, for Building Your Team of Visa Doctors with Jan Pederson. Jan brings over 35 years of experience and was key to establishing several J1 waiver programs in the late 1980s. She has been honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award for her work in J1 waivers, representing thousands of physicians and dozens of hospitals across the USA. Her work with the US Congress to reform immigration laws also continues even today. It's my pleasure to present today. I'm Benjamin Hu, a former journalist and current immigration attorney who is honored to have worked with Jan Pederson on dozens of J1 physician cases. So as a brief note of caution, a disclaimer, this presentation today is provided for informational purposes only and is not legal advice. It does not create an attorney-client relationship between WCS and any participant. Any opinions, pungent or otherwise, expressed through this are the opinions of the speakers only and not of the law firm. This session will be recorded and will be made available online later.
Thank you so much, Ben, for that kind introduction. I want to welcome everyone who is participating today, and I assure you that you should put your questions in the chat box and we will answer them. It's great to see that we have a lot of state 30 folks on our call. Welcome to you and thank you for your fabulous work. We have J1 physicians and we also have physician recruiters. Thank you all for your wonderful and dedicated work.
So first of all, we start off with quite a bit of jargon, right? There's quite a few acronyms, abbreviations. It's a veritable alphabet soup. Can we define a couple of the key terms first?
Sure. So the key words are J1 physician. What is a J1 physician? It's a physician who came to the United States with a J1 visa to complete their residency and fellowship. With the J1 visa comes the obligation that they return home for 2 years before returning in most work authorized statuses, but not all. It's important to appreciate all that our J1 physicians have done to get to the United States. They are the best of the best, struggle to get here, go through a lot more hoops than American doctors do. And we really need to appreciate what they did to get where they are today.
And so that waiver that we mentioned there, that's not just for a green card, but that's also just to work on standard work permit.
Yes, with the exception of the O1 visa and possibly some others. The important thing to remember is that our deal is it's a 3 for 2. If you agree to work, if the physician agrees to work in a medically underserved area or flex area for at least 3 years, then we forgive the requirement that they go home for 2 years.
So what is H-1B? This is kind of a quizzical terminology, sounds very arcane. What does that mean for the average physician?
An H-1B physician is a physician who is granted H-1B status as a professional, which obviously physicians are. Some, but very few, physicians enter the United States and complete their graduate medical education in H-1B status. If they completed their training in H-1B status and have no other J-1 obligation, you don't need to worry about a J-1 waiver. And you can leave the seminar now if you have only H-1B physicians. No, not really. We're going to talk about the issues with H's. Next slide,
Interesting.
please.
So the J1 is the part that brings the 2-year residence requirement. The H-1B is after you've gone past that requirement, or if you never had one in the first place, you can jump straight to it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Here are some definitions for you. I'm sure that most of you are familiar with them. Some of you may not be. So quickly, when we talk about medically underserved areas, we're talking about 3 different types of waivers. We have a basket of waivers. We have HPSA areas on the one hand and MUA areas on the other. HPSA means Health Professional Shortage Area, designated by HHS. MUA means Medically Underserved Area, or MUP, medically underserved population, both also designated by HHS. On the screen, we have listed the site, which all of you can refer to see if an area where you propose placing a physician is in a medically underserved or HIPSA area.
And that's that HIPSA find at hrsa.gov. You can
Yes.
key in your own address and your zip code and find whether or not your target institution qualifies in these areas.
Right. Okay, the other thing you need to be aware of when you're attempting to find visa doctors is to note the Canadian exception for H-1Bs. Canadian citizens and only Canadian citizens may obtain H-1B status in the United States without a J-1 waiver. However, the employer must be CAP exempt, and we'll talk more about that later. So recruiting Canadian citizens, they don't have to be born in Canada, is definitely a recruiting plus.
So we talked about Canada. Let's talk about the other regional territories and divisions. What are state 30 waivers and what does flex mean in that context?
Okay, each state, including DC, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Northern Mariana Islands, is authorized to grant 30 J-1 waivers per year for physicians to work in medically underserved areas or flex locations. Each state has different rules for allocating scarce slots. So the higher the demand for medically underserved area waivers, the less chance you are to obtain a flex waiver for your physician. A flex slot is a slot where the physician is not physically working in a medically underserved area, but who will serve residents who reside in medically underserved areas. Flex 10 slots are recruiting plus, and you always want to check with the states regarding their policy at any particular time. We would encourage states who have burdensome requirements for the flex slots to review them and see where they can loosen up. Particularly small medical practices report to us the paperwork burden in documenting where each of their patients lives, and sometimes programs want them for the last 3 years.
And telemedicine, I imagine, would also complicate things as well, right?
It complicates it, and we're not going to go into that today. There are many different policies, from no, you can't have telemedicine, to yes, you can, and to don't ask, don't tell.
But the takeaway being talk to your immigration attorney before you sign on the dotted line.
Yes.
Very good.
Okay, now our alphabet soup we will go through quickly so we can get to all your questions. We already have several in our chat box. All right, so we have federal interested government agency waivers. We call them federal IGAs.
Which are distinct from the Conrad state.
Yes, we're
separate
completely
level.
separate.
Okay.
We now have 5 agencies which grant J-1 physician waivers. And I didn't count the VA because they've become
They're in a state of suspended animation.
absolutely been. Okay, so
then these 5 commissions, I mean, each one has got different traits, and one of them is very, very new, as I understand.
yes, we just were able to add the Northern Border Regional Commission to our toolbox. It's a federal agency. Like all the others, can grant an unlimited number of J-1 waivers year-round.
So there's no numerical limitation. Each state is 30, but then the federal ones are just limitless and any time of year.
Limitless. And as you may have heard, HHS is drowning in waivers since they expanded their coverage to the entire nation, provided the facility has a HIPSA shortage score of 7 or greater, and the physician is a primary care physician or a hospitalist.
And those medical fields, primary care or hospitalists, that is HHS specific, right? The other ones are broader?
All the others permit all medical specialty. So all the others quickly are the Appalachian Regional Commission, the Northern Border Regional Commission, the Southeast Crescent Regional Commission, and
VRA.
and Delta Regional Authority, sorry.
And so those four ones are all geographically limited. HHS is nationwide, but limited more in field of expertise.
Correct.
Got it.
However, since they open their doors to all healthcare facilities or work locations with a HPSA score of 7 or greater, they've been inundated with waivers and getting hundreds and hundreds this year and in the past years when they have accepted them. So the plus on that is that the state 30 programs will have more numbers, more slots to use than they did before HHS started processing hospitalists and primary care physicians.
Now, also on this slide, and for the benefits of our listeners later on, there are two other types of waivers that are not geographic at all. And these are the hardship waivers and persecution waivers. And I know a lot of people have got questions on how those play along. Are they completely separate categories? How do they work?
Hardship waivers and persecution waivers may be filed simultaneously with a federal or state 30 waiver application. They're the only ones that can. Physicians cannot have more than one federal or state 30 waiver pending at the same time. Hardship waivers and persecution waivers are great if you can get them, great for employers, great for the physicians. The hardship waivers and persecution waivers are self-petitions by the physician to waive the 2-year home residency requirement based on hardship to qualifying relatives or persecution to the physician, him or herself.
And so these would be highly dependent on one's own personal history and biographical background and facts. So,
and more importantly, on the geopolitical situation. So 5 years ago, it might not be of hardship to return to the Ukraine. Today, you can assume an almost 100% approval rate. On that note, I would say that virtually all waivers have very nearly 100% approval rate at the end of the day. Hardship and persecution waivers are filed by the physician themselves and may be filed anytime during their training, a week after they start, a month, or whatever. The only caveat there is that if you're lucky enough to get a hardship or persecution waiver approved, ECFMG will not extend the J status beyond your current training period, plus a period of time to take your board exam. So, physician to take the board exam.
So scheduling is important, facts are important, and geopoliticals are important. So in other words, talk to your immigration attorney.
Exactly.
Next up, let's talk a little bit about the process of drafting those most valued player physicians. Talk to us a little bit about how that process and both from the physician side and from the hospital side.
What football team is that?
I don't know. I don't follow golf.
Okay. So drafting them and you're recruiting the physicians is you want to check whether you fall within any of the federal waivers that we just discussed. All but HHS, as Ben said, are geographically based. If you go to their websites, you will be able to find the counties and states which are covered by each waiver program. So in drafting them, you want to see, can we use a federal program?
Some state programs require you to check out a relevant federal program first before you bother them, right?
Right. In fact, several states require you to use the federal program if you're eligible to do so, and only come back to them if you're not eligible for the federal program. The other thing to consider is spouse, our physician couples. Very often the spouses of H-1B will get the derivative spouse status H-4. And many H-4s can obtain work permission in their H-4 status if the other conditions are met. So that is a recruiting bonus. You may get 2 physicians in your community for the price of 1. Okay, the other one we already mentioned is Canadian citizen recruiting bonuses. If you want the physician and the physician wants you, and there's no state 30 waivers left for the current year, see if they qualify for H-1B status. So in that respect, Canadian citizens have far more employment opportunities.
And these are citizens, not just Canadian, so quote unquote, green card holders. You have to have a passport.
Must be Canadian citizen. Doesn't
Okay.
matter where they were born.
Mhm.
Okay, now let's talk about the timeline. The current landscape. Okay, all of the employers and the physicians want to know when they can start work. As we all recognize, physicians generally finish their training on June 30th. If they have J1 status, they're generally entitled to a 30-day grace period after their last day of training. And during that grace period, they cannot work, but it gives you extra time to prepare and file the H-1 petition after getting the waiver completed. Again, we have a meltdown in the waiver review division of the State Department where processing times are unpredictable, and lawyers don't like to tell their clients, we can't exactly tell you when it will be done. The employers don't want to know when they can start scheduling patients. There's just an unprecedented level of uncertainty, which has increased the last couple of years. There is new leadership at the waiver review division, and the organization of physician attorneys has been in dialogue with them about figuring out how to get your doctors to work. You see October on the calendar. I'm sure most all of you don't want your physicians in October. You want them before, and the doctors want to be there before. What I would suggest to folks, even though Ben didn't ask me, is contact your congressmen and senators if you really need a physician and you cannot deal with the uncertainty. If, for example, if you had a physician give you a week notice, then and you only have 2 physicians in the practice, then you desperately need a physician. So the more the State Department hears from congressional representatives who have been contacted by employers and physicians, the more it helps us help you.
Can you give any words of advice from the physician's viewpoint for timetabling? Say they're going to go for one of the quotas that does have a certain schedule on a year when they have to apply. So not one of the federal ones, but one of the ones where they have to apply later in the year. They don't want to wait until the application date to put things together, right? They need to start moving through the process in other agencies first.
Right. Many doctors are signing contracts now to start in July 2025.
Interesting.
So yes, so we really need the help of the employers and the physicians. Physicians on J1 often think they don't matter to their congressmen and senators. I assure the physicians that you do matter, even though you don't have the right to vote. Constituent service is a big part of what congressional offices do, and they will respond to you. If they get 10 letters saying, we have 10 doctors in Kansas whose waivers are stuck at the State Department, well, somebody's going to notice that and get on it. It does work, and J1 physicians can inquire. You need to use the congressman or senator in the place where you will work. Senators, sorry.
So
Yeah.
that's speaking from years of experience in the political system here. So,
Yeah, a little over 30 and doing physicians,
so
yes.
you know your way around. So we just talked about signing on a contract. Let's go through some of the terms for that and talk a little bit from the physician's viewpoint, from the hospital viewpoint. What should they be aware of? It's not just any old contract, right?
Right, these are just some of the most important. There are a number of others. So federal and state both require a written employment contract where the physician agrees to provide 40 hours per week of direct patient care for a minimum of 3 years. Okay, so the direct patient care is important. Your case will be bounced back if you leave out those words. Those were added by the State Department some years ago. All kinds of questions come about with that, we would be happy to discuss those issues with you. Non-compete clauses are prohibited absolutely completely in federal interested government agency waivers and in most states. But meanwhile, employers like the clauses, doctors don't like the clauses, and the way agency officials granting waivers don't like them. They want you to stay forever. We would like the doctors to stay forever, and we would encourage employers to welcome the physician and his or her family and children with open arms, help introduce them around the community when they come for the site visit, make them feel special and wanted and needed, all of which they are. But they need to understand that you think that too. So anyway, about non-compete clauses, I do digress. The Federal Trade Commission has helped us along there, and they just enacted a regulation to prohibit them in most employment things, so that if all the regulations, they're being challenged in court and so forth, but it would appear that non-compete clauses for most employment contracts are out. You can check with your particular state rules on that, and an employment lawyer can tell you how the Federal Trade Commission regulation impacts that.
Right. You can always get other lawyers involved in the process. You can have an immigration attorney and also an employment contract attorney looking things over.
Yes, and you will want to do so in many cases.
So we talked about non-complete clauses, they're out. But talk to us a little bit about liquidated damage penalty clauses. They're still in, right?
Yes, they're the worst thing ever. The ARC invented them in, I don't know, somewhere in the 90s. SCRC adopted them, but they will waive them, and most physicians and employers waive them. The MBRC unfortunately adopted the liquidated damage penalty clause, I believe. What they are, for those of you who don't know, they basically say that if the physician does not remain in the waiver job for the required 3 years, he or she will pay the employer $250,000. Now, at a minimum, that tells the doctor that there's a presumption of guilt if anything goes wrong in their relationship. It's their fault. It has a very chilling effect on recruitment of physicians, and we would encourage that those agencies which have it, and a few states have them, delete them. They're seldom enforced. So I was basically, unfortunately or fortunately, the first physician to do J1 waivers back in the late 80s. And since that time, collectively among the attorneys, I think we identified 4 cases where somebody tried to enforce the liquidated damage penalty clauses.
That's like one a decade.
Yeah, I mean,
So it's
we
not,
haven't
not
heard
exactly
any,
an urgent problem.
right.
But
And the rules, they say if you complete your obligation in another underserved area within that geographic region that granted you the waiver, then you don't have to pay. But it's just a bad optic for trying to recruit a physician. If they can go to a state without a liquidated damage clause
right,
and get a waiver,
then why not?
they're likely to select that. Okay,
Spe-
the other important thing to remember is recruitment. We have this day in and day out. Employers have not done several months of recruitment. Most programs require 6 months. Many are flexible, depending on the circumstances, and don't require the 6 months. Maybe they would like it. And whatever you do, sign the employment contract after your recruitment period is up. I know that several programs have complained to the attorneys that people are sending in contracts signed before they did the recruitment, which kind of,
That's a bad look, right?
a bad optic, yes.
So we did mention state 30 programs. If we go to the next slide, let's talk a little bit about state waivers and terms for those.
Okay, so the federal waivers can be located in any area with the exception of ARC and HHS, which require a HPSA location. State 30 waivers generally permit the job to be in either a HPSA or MUA, or not in an underserved areas. So flex slots are a great tool for recruiters attempting to place positions in areas which are not medically underserved, but who have patients residing in medically underserved area. All states require some sort of prior recruitment. Many states prohibit non-competes. And common to both the state 30 and the federal, and confusing to everyone, so I'll just mention it briefly, is contracts, all state and federal, require a statement that the physician agrees to commence employment within 90 days of USCIS approval of the waiver and H-1B status.
Which is some unknown future inchoate date up to government operation.
Right, there's all kinds of unforeseen circumstance and possibility of performance and all that stuff. We don't worry about it much. It was put in there because there was some abuse where somebody signed a contract 2 years before they could even dream of starting. So yeah, talk to your lawyer, physician immigration lawyer, about whether you need to worry about it in your case. We have listed on the slides, which we made available to all of you, some considerations in the state programs. I want to mention some states that don't all use all their slots. If I left you out, tell me in the chat if you're here. Alaska, Colorado, Georgia, Hawaii, Louisiana, Mississippi, Nebraska, Nevada, New Hampshire, New Jersey, South Carolina, Utah, and Wyoming generally do not use all their slots. But don't be deterred if your state is not on that list. It may not be too late. The great news on the application process comes from California. Last year, they agreed to accept subspecialty slots from the first day the program opens in October throughout the fiscal year. Prior to that, California became pretty much off limits to subspecialty physicians because they did not start accepting subspecialty waivers until July 1st. Well, if you're a physician who finished your waiver on June 30th, you can't really, in many cases, wait for a waiver that is only filed July 1st. Okay, we've done the waiver, a big weight off your shoulder. You can pretty much consider that you've hit the finish line, but we put you in the red zone here. Then you do the H-1B. We're not going to go into a lot of detail today on that because we want to take time for your questions. So first of all, when can it be filed? H-1B petitions may be filed up to 6 months before the anticipated start date. That's the start date you put on the petition and the underlying labor condition application. Should not be filed until you get the J-1 waiver approval after step 3. So it's from the interested government agency recommends the waiver to the Department of State. The Department of State recommends it to USCIS and approve it. We prefer to have all that done, but what happens? The doctor's going to go out of status 30 days after their program ends, or if they're lucky, they should always register to take a board exam, and ECFMG will extend the J-1 program until the last day of the month when the board exam is given. We tell all our clients to do that. You never know what glitches you run into along the way. So you may obtain an extension of your J-1 status if you're the physician, if you have a board exam to be given within 6 months after the completion of your training.
And then as long as the waiver has gotten to Department of State's stamp of approval, as long as state has signed off on the waiver, then the H-1B can be filed.
Yes, if you're desperate and running out of time, you got to file the H-1 petition along with request for change of status. Otherwise, you'll fall out of status. So if you don't have the final USCIS approval, you may file the H-1B petition when the visa application shows up as recommended for approval on the DOS website. We just include a screenshot of the DOS website. Now, you will get a request for further evidence to provide that. So by that time, hopefully you will have the waiver.
Now, most people who are familiar with the H-1B, they'll know about October 1st, and they'll know about April 1st. Are those dates still relevant to doctors? And if not, why not?
Okay, Ben, if you by that, you're referring to the H-1B lottery season. It does not apply to most physicians. For a number of reasons, which we'll go into briefly. H1, April 1st is the cap, when the cap season, well, it actually starts in March. So it's 85,000 H-1B visa numbers available per year, and they always get far in excess of the 85,000 in winner. We call it winners of the H-1B lottery. So don't get confused. Virtually all your physicians will be exempt from the H-1B cap. They are called cap exempt. Okay, which of your physician is cap exempt? No, time. All physicians with interested government agency waivers. That's all. And the physician has that waiver, puts it in his pocket, and it's valid forever. So after he or she finishes the 3 years, the waiver goes in his pocket and goes anywhere, and he can go with the most non-cap exempt employer in the world. So it's basically the only waiver that's owned by the foreign national H-1B worker.
Rather than the US employer. Got it.
Right,
And
it's
so
not-
that's for federal commission IGAs and also for state 30
All,
IGAs?
yes.
Okay.
But does not apply to hardship and persecution waivers. They are not exempt from the cap. However, they may have an employer who is an institution of higher education or an affiliated nonprofit entity. Then the employer owns the cap exemption, and the beneficiary, the foreign national H-1B, gets it. Okay, so a lot of people are exempt from the cap, a lot of employers, and a lot of employers don't know it. So teaching hospitals, universities, many community health centers, certified rural health clinics, there's all kinds of exemptions. So we would be happy to work with any of you who wants to find out if your employer can get a cap exemption. The next one's really, really important, especially for hospitalists or other for-profit groups providing services at a hospital. So if your physician will be employed by a for-profit entity, such as a hospitalist company or other related company, at institutions of higher education, or at an affiliated nonprofit entity, that is a big, big, big recruiting plus. That's called the by-ad exemption, and very important to remember. The physician does not have to work full-time at the cap exempt entity. We say at least 51% of the time. Okay, if for some reason their H-1B worker has already been counted against the cap, they are probably exempt. Beneficiaries of multiple positions, we'd be happy to talk to you in detail about that. That relates to concurrent employment. That gets into very complicated and sophisticated reasoning and analysis, which
Right.
is
So
a
talk to your
case.
attorney, essentially.
Talk to your attorney, yes.
And so,
Okay, the other thing to remember is if a physician happened to finish their residency or fellowship on H-1B status, then they were doing a residency at a cap exempt institution, which is most likely the case. If they're transferring to a non-cap exempt employer, then they lose their cap exemption.
so to summarize, if you are cap exempt, if your situation is cap exempt, you can then file the H any time of year. You don't have to wait until that March,
Correct.
April rush for lottery.
Right, there's
So
no
that's
rush,
great.
no H-1B lottery.
Some flavors of these cap exemptions follow the physician personally, like the IGA waivers.
Only the IGA waiver.
And then a number of them also are employer specific based on these different factors we've listed here.
Exactly. And this isn't an exhaustive list, but we'd be happy to work with you on it.
And then for folks who never actually touched the J1 status, who went straight into H1B and did the training on H1B, that's fine and all. You don't have to have the J1 waiver, but you still have to navigate you may have to work out whether or not you qualify for the H1 cap exemption.
Yeah, and that would
Separate
be for
issue.
Canadian citizens also who want to work without a J1 waiver.
Right. So aside from H's, there are an exciting array of alternative options.
I can't see the top of the screen.
It's a workaround if no touchdown this year.
Okay, no touchdown this year.
Here we go.
All right, so what do you do? What are the options? Briefly, there are workarounds that we can discuss briefly. We're running out of time and we have a lot of questions. So there's the O1 petition. Okay, the O1 petition is for an employer-sponsored petition. It doesn't have all the rules and regulations that go with H. However, the physician must prove they are of extraordinary ability.
Top few percent of the field.
Yes, but immigration is pretty generous with that, but not so generous that employers out of saying, okay, we don't have waivers in the state this year, go get an O1. So I hear that a lot. Like they're not handing them out at the back door of USCIS. It's a matter of proof. Although to be fair, immigration has been generous with that, unlike in other extraordinary ability petitions like EB1A. Okay, we love the H4 spouse EAD. In order to get that, the H1 physician must have an approved immigrant visa petition I-140. And that can be worked on too. Workaround that we've been relying on for, 20 years, the physician national interest petition, it's down on your list here. Okay, that was the only green card application that you could file during your 3-year commitment. So while you can file the petition to remove the 6-year limit once it's approved, then you can't file for the green card where you got EAD and travel permit, spouse could work easily, etc. The reason that's not viable unless you start very early is that there's been a retrogression in the employment-based immigrant visa numbers for the world, every country in the world. Did I make that clear?
Yeah.
Okay. Other option, sadly, because of the world situation and people going to war, a physician might have temporary protected status available for many countries. Some of the ones you'll encounter would be Sudan, Ukraine, El Salvador, not terribly viable, but there are a lot of them. If you want to Google temporary protected status countries, USCIS does a great job of listing the countries and the specific requirements. You can also have the physician look at political asylum depending on the country. Syria, a persecution waiver, hardship waiver, briefly discussed. Just ran over the physician national interest petition. EB5 investor green cards for a few of the extremely wealthy physicians. How much do we need, Ben?
800,000
Minimum of 800,000.
So get out your negotiating hat.
Yeah, or maybe they got lots of good wedding presents. Then we have the Canadian citizen exemption. And then J2 spouse work permit if spouse is in J1. That isn't very valuable. I'm sorry, that is valuable in some circumstances.
So then aside from the workarounds, we have the end goal, which are green cards.
Yes, green cards.
Questions?
Yes, okay, what we really want, no, not yet. Yes, go ahead. Not yet. What we really want all recruiters and employers to understand is that more important than money, but I do have the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow there.
The goal
Their
of
pot of gold, it has a green card in it. what's important to them is visa security. They've lived through years and years of visa insecurity. Many come from countries that are undergoing civil wars, have been for decades. So talk to them about a green card. Often the physicians are shy about bringing it up. They think the employer might be deterred somehow. So they can obtain a green card through employer sponsorship or national interest petition. The employer offering to sponsor the green card means a lot to them. I have talked to, oh my God, over the years, thousands of doctors. Yeah, maybe thousands of doctors. And they value that a lot. And they like for the employers to bring it up. Again, they may be too shy. That will hopefully build physician commitment and loyalty to the employer for showing they care about their future. Okay, for India and China-born physicians who are H-1B physicians, it may be essential to start the green card at the earliest possible moment in order to get them to work at all. And of course, if they're married to an American or permanent resident, no employment sponsorship is likely required.
Just a couple of notes,
Yes.
perhaps for people who are looking into the actual contracts or nitty-gritty and negotiations.
Two. Yes, or non-complete liquidated damage work locations. Remember the waiver application deadlines to
So
avoid snags along the way.
this is just a couple of bullet points there for those who are tuning in on a screen. And also with the next slide, just which steps for kickoff to get you off to a good start.
Yes, possible snags we went through, and now we're initial steps. You want to team up with an accessible expert physician immigration lawyer and make he or she a part of your team. Interface with the lawyer to overcome obstacles during each process. What we do for our clients is complete an early immigration checkup on behalf of the employer to discuss immigration option with the physicians and to discuss whether the job is immigration viable from an immigration standpoint to save disappointment later on. Interview the physician as early as possible and know the waiver application deadlines and file at the earliest possible moment. All right, so now we have time for a few questions. And I might say we welcome the opportunity to work with all of you and your physicians. And we thoroughly enjoy working with all the state 30 and federal waiver representatives. You are very dedicated and underpaid and overworked, and we thank you for all you do to bring physicians to your state. Now we have time for just a couple of questions. The first question is, what constitutes a cap exempt area for Canadians? Are these area only ARC or Delta regions, or are there more? The entire country is open to Canadian citizens. That said, the employer themselves must be cap exempt. As we said, a university, and not obvious except a nonprofit or public university, any entity, nonprofit entity that's affiliated with a university. So there are a lot of exemptions. No, it's not, it has nothing to do with ARC or Delta. Next question. Why are ARC waivers delayed?
One of our doctors had to leave the
Yeah.
country due to the extended delays. As an employer, these ARC delays directly impact our ability to hire and retain qualified physicians.
I couldn't agree with you more. They are very paperwork heavy. They have extra steps that other programs do not, that the waivers must initially be filed with the State Department of Health where the job is located. They vet it, send it on to ARC. So there's a very long processing time, very paperwork heavy. we would encourage ARC to reduce the paperwork and the processing time. Next, go
Next
ahead,
up question,
Ben.
how easy or difficult is it to extend J1 visa beyond 7 years? If they are interested in doing a fellowship after 6 years surgery residency, 5 year surgery, and 1 year research in between.
Well, did I count 6 years there or 7?
It seems 6+1, or that would be
Well,
8.
if the question is beyond 7 years, yes, there's a general limit in J1 status to 7 years. And if you want beyond 7 years, you have to go through a somewhat arduous process with ECFMG to get the extension. A lot of letters from back home saying they need this super specialized skill. There are a lot of hurdles to go through. In the past, there have been occasions where people got beyond the 7 years for some subspecialty, had turned in letters from professors in their home countries, medical institutions saying they direly needed this super subspecialty. I'm trying to think of one. And then the next year they would come up and ask for a waiver, and they said, well, wait a second. You just swore up and down that you were needed in your country, had all these letters, and you're going back to your country. Okay, that hasn't been brought up in decades. I think I remember 1 or 2 cases over 30 years. So just do what the CFMG says, and unless it's entirely unreasonable, there's a fairly good chance of getting it.
Okay. The next question was a brief one about commenting on O1 visas. That might have been submitted before you started talking about that. So if you have further questions beyond what Jan Pederson said, please enter them at the bottom of the chat. Next question, what categories are included in primary care? So they're trying to understand if any waiver option that says primary care can also include general surgery.
Absolutely not. Primary care is, let me see if I got them here, pediatrics, internal medicine, OBGYN,
Psychology.
family medicine, and psychiatry.
Right. It says that very specific
Okay,
handful.
thank you, Brianna. New Jersey just used up its 30.
Oh.
Yeah, but it is, the end of June. Congratulations, New Jersey. I actually have one to file in New Jersey. However, correct me if I'm wrong, Brianna, but New Jersey will accept the waiver applications now for next fiscal year, but will not process them till October 1st. So let me know if that's right, Brianna.
And is that also like a state by state way of doing things? So this is speaking
Each
from
state
experience.
has different application cycles, time periods, and so forth. So it's necessary to look. Some states have a period October 1 to October 30. Everything is received. That's Kentucky, Iowa, Indiana, a few others. Others do rolling decision making based on when they receive the application.
So the privileges of long experience in the field. Next question is, who starts the waiver request? The doctor or
You
the
forgot Alabama's question.
Oh, Alabama has 6 spots open.
Yeah, so those of you looking, Alabama does a lot of waivers. They do them through the state 30, through the ARC, HHS. They've got, I don't know if they have any Delta. No, Delta's not Alabama. So yeah, if you have the job offers in Alabama, one thing I would say to those on the call, generally state 30 people do not act as an employment agency. However, they're generally lovely about saying, well, I heard that maybe this hospital has, but officially they're not an employment agency or a clearinghouse, but they are helpful. North Carolina just reported in they still have slots available, including flex. Oh, that's great, Karen. Thank you for that information. So doctors on the call, slots available in North Carolina and in Alabama.
So
next question.
We had this one, who starts the waiver request, the doctor or the employer, and how do employers contact doctors who are interested in a waiver?
That's a fabulous question. Thank you for whoever asked it.
Judy.
The waiver must be filed by the employer on behalf of the prospective J1 physician employee. Must be filed by them, submitted. Leave the question there, please. Go back. Okay. So how do the employers find doctors interested in a waiver? One of the best sources here is for you to post your resume regardless of specialty is 3rnet.org. Can you put that in the chat?
Sure.
3rnet.org has a lot of valuable information. So put your resume there. Employers looking for J1 physicians often look there. I know for our employers who request that we post on the J1 physician Facebook page. Could you go back to that question again, please, Ben? Okay, so various ways, and of course they advertise in the regular Doc Cafe, Practice Link, Practice Match. There's a whole bunch of them, but I find Doc Cafe, but I think that's pretty much how they do it, or word of mouth from current employees. As you all know, word of mouth is always the best way. You want to, employers regularly contact residency and fellowship programs looking for physicians. So keep posted, speak with your program directors in the residency or fellowship. They very often receive correspondence. In fact, many waiver programs strongly encourage that. And North Carolina report, we already saw North Carolina.
Okay. Rhode Island reporting 5.
And a point about the waivers is the Department of State. The Department of State wants the waiver applications received on their desk, quote unquote. We don't actually know where their desk is. One thing I would encourage all the state and federal waiver representatives on the call is we as attorneys have been we need your help. We need your help in getting the State Department to accept waiver. Don't move that. Request your waiver applications be accepted by email. And we've been trying this since COVID. Ben took the biggest waiver request application that we had, about like that, and condensed it into a PDF that was legible. We showed the State Department that worked, but we need the states to tell the State Department you want to email them, because as you know, it can take 4 to 6 weeks for the waiver application that you send to the State Department to show up on their website.
We have Jill Derrico reporting in that Rhode Island has 5 left, and also
I think
is
left, yes.
pushing the HHS waivers, understandably.
Yes, Rhode Island does a great job.
Is it possible to do fellowship as part of a waiver?
Thank you for that question. We get that all the time. Not like every day, but I would say 5 or 6 times a year. Answer, no. And a lot of people want to do that, but I would say generally no. There may be in exceptional circumstances. We have also had people take leaves of absence from their waiver job to do a fellowship, promising, and in fact, coming back to the waiver job after the fellowship, even being more well-trained.
Well, there's a question about slides. I think that the slides will be made available as well.
No, but go back to one slide, considerations about family. Okay, so consider that particularly in rural areas, you're recruiting a family. You want husband, wife, kids to all be happy in your community, so they integrate, take all the steps necessary to integrate them, bring them all to the job interview, have the job interview last 2 or 3 days, introduce them to the medical staff, the banker, the real estate agent, have a dinner for current medical, the medical community for them, make them feel welcome, take them around. If they have school-age children, take them to the schools, introduce them, show them the schools, a community integration plan. So we would like it to be a welcome mat, introduce the doctors, as I just said, to important community members, bankers, preachers, mayors, share school district information, and take them to the local diner. It's just about welcoming them. And the more you do that, the more likely your doctor is going to be to integrate and stay in the community. I mean, imagine the many doctors have felt like second-class citizens for a good part of their career since they got to America. They feel they get leftover residencies. We want to change that perception that has been creeping along, that we hear too often. We say, how's your job going? Well, it's good, but it's a J1 waiver job. Let's all work together to try to change that perception. It's a great opportunity. We always tell our physicians that if you live in a rural area, in an underserved area, your child is more likely to get into Harvard. And they act like they don't believe me. So I'm gathering, it's actually statistically true. If you graduate from high school in Fairfax, Virginia, or in Berkeley, West Virginia, your chance, all things being equal, of getting into Harvard are greatly enhanced. So remember that, doctors on the call, and we do have a lot of you here.
The question, next question, can we have a list of organizations in the US that can sponsor a physician? Does such a list exist?
No. I mean, any physician, sole proprietor, partnership, corporation, hospital, university can sponsor. Theoretically, you can't sponsor, however, you can't sponsor yourself for a waiver. So those organizations are your potential pool. Then you look at whether they're a medically underserved area, what kind of medically underserved area, if they come within a waiver jurisdiction. I hope that helps, but there's not specifically an organization. But the people, J1 eligible sites who know they're eligible will likely look on 3RNet.
And then a shout out, if any state has filled their slots, send any additional inquiries to Alaska, as they have plenty to spare, along with the most beautiful coastlines in America.
Well, my good part of my family live in Alaska. My sister lives on an island, has lived there since the 70s. They do not have a doctor. They're for sure medically underserved. Interestingly enough, back in the beginning of the J1 waiver program, Alaska had a state law that prevented a foreign medical graduate from getting a medical license in Alaska. However, we worked with a great employer there, which was a community health center. We got the Alaska legislator to change the law. Okay, from Utah, shout out from Utah. They want your doctors. All right. Good.
And the remainder is that's pretty much it for the actual questions. We had one that was submitted a couple of sessions ago, which I think bears repeating. And that's if you have a J2 spouse, they can work in J2, but then do they have to consider a period of not working if they go into H4 if their spouse goes through H1B?
J2 spouses can always get work permits, and then they lose it when the J1 finishes training. So they would like an H4 work permit, and that's possible to do, and we do a lot of them. There would need to be an immigrant visa petition filed. And Karen has shared with us the 3rnet.org.
Yep, instructions for searching.
Thank you, Karen. I promise to come and visit you. I still will get down there. And then Brianna has given us the website to find shortage areas. And in our last minute,
if you have an H1 doctor spouse and their H4 doctor spouse, do they have to be living together? We've had this question come up once before. So, Jan, if you can put on your marriage counselor hat and answer this question for the doctors who might be viewing.
no.
Does immigration care?
No.
So there you have it. You can go forth and serve multiple different communities if your employment journeys take you in those directions.
Our immigration team, finally, as a final note, would welcome the opportunity to work with you and your physicians. Well, why we are different in our approach? Well, for better or for worse, we've been doing it the longest since the late 80s. The other three attorneys, shall I say, the other three attorneys who worked with me to get waiver programs started have passed away. So I'm the sole survivor. Our firm is very into providing concierge service to our clients, where you have an attorney always available to you, and fast, reliable service, knowledge of all waiver programs, good working relationship with our wonderful state 30 and federal officials. So let us know, and the contact information is on the last slide if you wish to contact us. Wait, we have one more comment I'd like to address here.
The contact on the 3R net requires board certification or eligibility, which is not possible outside the US.
I don't think that's true. Oh, wait, board, I don't. Karen or Brianna, do you know about that? Where 3R net requires board certified or board eligible? Okay, our wonderful Karen from North Carolina says no board eligible requirement. So that person can get in touch with us if they have a question. Obviously, you have to be eligible for licensure here. As you know, many states will give you a medical license without the USMLE exam. But that doesn't take care of your J1 waiver issues if you need one. Okay, I want to thank all of you wonderful folks for attending, and have a great day. Send us your question. I hope you learned something, and I thank you for those of you in the audience who contributed to the value of the webinar for other people. Again, this will be available on podcast and YouTube after being edited out for the screen problems. Thank you and have a great day.
Contact details at the end here. Thank you all very much, and
Bye.
take care.
Have a great day. Thank you.